Reading from the June 3rd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under Business and Finance are: Fed Chairman Kevin Warsh tapped two outside associates as advisors, one of whom previously helped write a conservative blueprint that recommended a radical restructuring of the central bank. New developments in AI helped lift the S&P 500 by 0.1% for its longest winning streak in more than a year, while the Dow and Nasdaq rose 0.4% and less than 0.1% respectively. Veteran 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley was fired by CBS News a day after criticizing editor-in-chief Barry Weiss's leadership during a staff meeting for the show. Victoria's Secret reported net sales for the first quarter of $1.56 billion, up 15% from $1.35 billion the previous year. Nestle and Helena entered a multi-year partnership to develop infant formula with proteins identical to those found in human breast milk. Dollar General reported that its sales climbed 3.4% during its fiscal first quarter to $10.79 billion and raised its outlook for full-year adjusted earnings per share. Country music star Garth Brooks is considering a sale of his catalog, eyeing roughly $2 billion for the rights to his songs and recordings. GameStop reported a higher profit for the first quarter and said its board approved a $2 billion stock buyback authorization. UniCredit said it secured commitments to raise its stake in Commerce Bank to more than 30% as it attempts to take over its German competitor. Server and networking company HPE brought forward its long-term financial targets by 2 years after reporting 40% growth in second quarter revenue. Longevity startup New Limit said a fundraising round boosted its valuation to $3.1 billion, more than triple what it was a year ago. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. The Trump administration abandoned its $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund after it drew broad condemnation from Republican lawmakers and threatened to sink an unrelated immigration enforcement bill. Trump signed an executive order asking artificial intelligence companies to give the administration access to powerful models 30 days before public release. Trump named Bill Pulte, an ally who leads the Federal Housing Finance Agency and who urged investigations into the president's perceived enemies, as acting director of national intelligence. The Supreme Court allowed Alabama to use a congressional map eliminating one of the state's 2 Democratic-leaning districts, lifting a lower court decision. The U.S. and Iran exchanged fire in a series of strikes, but the ceasefire was still officially ongoing. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth blocked the appointments of 9 Air Force colonels and delayed the promotion of at least 24 more senior officers. The Army integrated more than 70 weapons, sensor, and radar systems that previously weren't interoperable to better defend troops in the field. The National Rifle Association's charitable arm is separating from the political wing and rebranding itself. The EU overhauled its migration policy, aiming to increase deportations. New York's Attorney General is leading a lawsuit to challenge the Trump administration's deal that killed a French energy company's offshore wind projects. The picture on today's front page takes place obviously in a war zone, and in the background buildings are ablaze. The clouds of black smoke are filtering toward a man with an obvious bandaged head wound as he is walking away. And the headline reads, Russia's attacks on Ukraine civilians intensify. The caption, a flame. A Kyiv resident stands at the site of a Russian drone and missile strike Tuesday. The nationwide barrage killed at least 22 people, including 6 in Kyiv, and injured more than 100, as the Kremlin sought to exploit gaps in Ukraine's air defense. The article, Russia intensifies civilian attacks. Moscow appears more reliant on long-range strikes as it stalls on battlefield, by Anastasia Malenko, Kyiv, Ukraine. Russia unleashed its third massive attack on Kyiv in less than 3 weeks overnight into Tuesday, with deadly aerial barrages indicating that as the Kremlin stalls on the battlefield, it is exploiting holes in Ukraine's air defense to inflict pain on civilians. The heavy nationwide drone and missile strikes killed at least 22 people and injured more than 100 others, Ukrainian authorities said. It comes after Moscow threatened to step up its attacks on Kyiv and asked foreign residents and diplomats to evacuate the city last week. Plumes of black smoke rose over Kyiv after explosions from missiles and drones sent residents fleeing to shelters in the early morning. A large-scale attack and an absolutely clear statement from Russia. If Ukraine is not protected from ballistic and other missile strikes, these attacks will continue. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wrote Tuesday on X. Europe needs its own anti-ballistic defense so that this war can finally be brought to an end. And assistance from the United States in supplying missiles for Patriot systems is absolutely necessary. Other articles from the front page follow. Trump scraps $1.8 billion fund after backlash from own party. DOJ chief rules out plan that was widely attacked as a means to reward political allies. By Lindsay Wise, Sadie Gurman, and Siobhan Hughes. Washington. The Trump administration is abandoning its $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund after it drew broad condemnation from Republican lawmakers and threatened to sink an unrelated immigration enforcement bill. We're not moving forward with the fund, period, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said Tuesday at a House Appropriations Subcommittee meeting. The creation of the fund caused an uproar in Congress last month among President Trump's fellow Republicans and Democrats, who said it would use taxpayer money to compensate Trump's allies, as well as reward people who had assaulted police officers when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Many GOP lawmakers have pressed for an unambiguous statement from the administration that the fund was dead. Pronouncing the fund dead might not be enough for some Republican lawmakers who want a legislative fix. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, said he wants the administration to endorse an amendment to ensure the fund never comes back. President pursues oversight of new AI models. Executive order asks companies to give U.S. 30 days to review before release. By Amrith Ramkumar. President Trump signed an executive order Tuesday asking artificial intelligence companies to give the administration access to powerful models 30 days before public release, just 2 weeks after shelving a previous version. The order, which aims to increase the federal government's oversight of the technology, also asks national security and cyber officials to work with agency heads and top tech companies to address software vulnerabilities identified by models like Anthropic's Mythos. The White House said the executive order is a slimmed-down version of the one Trump shelved on May 21st. That version included the cybersecurity component, but would have asked companies to let the government review models for a longer period, up to 90 days. Housing Chief Tapped for Intelligence Role by Natalie Andrews, Gina Hebe, and Siobhan Hughes. Washington. President Trump said Tuesday he was appointing Bill Pulte, a close ally who leads the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and who urged investigations into the president's perceived enemies as acting director of national intelligence. Pulte will succeed Tulsi Gabbard, who resigned last month, until the president nominates a permanent successor. Trump, in a social media post, said that Pulte has deep experience managing the most sensitive matters in America, citing his having taken over as the chairman of mortgage finance giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac earlier last year. Pulte's career has been primarily focused on finance and home building, and he has no known national security experience. The president said Pulte would remain director of the FHFA and chairman of Fannie and Freddie, while serving as acting director of national intelligence. The naming of Pulte was met with skepticism on Capitol Hill. We don't need a weaponized DNI, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, said. Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, said, I see no evidence of any qualification for the job. Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, said Pulte appears to have been selected precisely because the White House believes he will provide the narrative it wants, not the intelligence we need. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S.-Israeli leaders clash over war's end, by Alexander Ward in Washington, D.C., Anat Peled in Tel Aviv, and Omar Abdel Bakwi in London. President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel launched the war against Iran with an unprecedented level of coordination. 3 months later, they are fighting over how to bring the conflict to a close. Trump wants a diplomatic agreement that would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, dispose of Iran's enriched uranium, and end a conflict that has driven up energy prices and divided his political base. Netanyahu faces pressure at home to intensify military operations against Hezbollah, Iran's most important regional proxy and a U.S.-designated terrorist group. The tensions spilled into the open in the past week over Lebanon, where Tehran has made an end to fighting between Israel and Hezbollah, a condition for broader talks with Washington. An intense series of meetings produced a fragile agreement that Hezbollah would stop attacks on Israel and that Israel wouldn't assault Beirut, Lebanon's capital, though fighting continued elsewhere on Tuesday. It began on Friday when Trump gathered aides in the White House Situation Room and said he wanted a better peace proposal from Iran with guarantees it would never seek a nuclear weapon and clarity for disposing of its enriched uranium, U.S. officials said. It was an urgent demand, as Trump has just publicly said a deal was close. But a new problem was brewing. Netanyahu was launching a major operation in Lebanon against Hezbollah, following a string of deadly drone attacks by the militant group. Trump was briefed that escalation there could derail the Iran peace talks, U.S. officials said. On Monday, Trump held 2 tense phone calls with Netanyahu about the impending operation, 2 people familiar with the matter said. Trump demanded Israel stop attacks on Beirut in both conversations, the people said, leading to heated discussions. But the second call escalated as Netanyahu insisted on attacking Hezbollah. Trump, his voice rising with anger, said Netanyahu had to obey because he would be in prison without the White House's support, the people said. Netanyahu faces a corruption trial in Israel, and Trump has repeatedly called for him to be pardoned. The calls contained a string of testy discussions between Trump and Netanyahu, including one just last month. Trump has also used salty language when talking about the prime minister, telling aides last year Netanyahu was effing me over strikes on Hamas in the Gaza Strip, to which the U.S. objected. The Monday calls show the difficulty of maintaining the close cooperation Trump and Netanyahu displayed during the fighting in their war with Iran, as Washington's focus shifts to ending the conflict. Both leaders face a ticking clock, with elections looming in the fall, and they are being pushed in opposite directions by their electorates. Trump, a Republican, is under pressure to wrap up a war that has pushed up energy prices and exposed divisions within his Make America Great Again movement, where influential voices such as Tucker Carlson have questioned U.S. support for Israel. There's a graph on the front page showing how Musk's fortune compares with other tech founders. Elon Musk's fortune is $970 billion. Jeff Bezos, $276 billion. Larry Ellison, $243 billion. Mark Zuckerman, $219 billion. Just how wealthy is Musk? The IPO for SpaceX could make Elon Musk the world's first trillionaire. His fortune now stands at roughly $970 billion, mostly in stock, according to a Wall Street Journal analysis. That includes $538 billion for his pre-IPO stake in SpaceX, $167 billion for his Tesla stake, and $5 billion apiece for the Boring Company and Neuralink. Now for other articles within the paper. Companies work on rare earth fill-ins. 3 businesses develop products that work around China's chokehold. By Jason Douglas and Junko Fukutomi. There is hope for escaping China's grip on rare earths. That is the message from some companies that toil far from the public eye, looking for ways to use fewer of the key minerals dominated by Beijing. At stake is both military supremacy. Rare earths are used in jet fighter engines and weapons, and control over civilian supply chains that currently are hooked on China's minerals. Here are 3 companies that see another path. Near magnets don't use rare earths. Instead, the basic building blocks are just iron and nitrogen. Z.F. Friedrichshafen, a German company that makes high-tech parts for cars and trucks, has developed a motor for electric vehicles that doesn't use magnets at all. Following a 2010 wake-up call, engineers at Japan's Daido Steel wondered if there was a way to make magnets that use only light rare earths, which are more abundant and mined in places such as Australia. It manufactures neodymium magnets by pouring liquid alloy onto a rotating, cooled disc, then rapidly quenching and pulverizing it to freeze the delicate crystalline structure at a microscopic scale before it can grow. The result, the company says, is a magnet with comparable performance to a standard permanent magnet without any heavy rare earths. Applications include semiconductor manufacturing to power steering and electric windows in cars. Japanese car maker Honda is using the heavy rare earth-free magnet in some hybrid vehicle motors. Auto strike hit some of GM's best sellers. By Christopher Otts. Hundreds of unionized workers walked off the line on Monday at an auto parts supplier in Three Rivers, Michigan. Their leverage is about 160 miles away in Detroit. The work stoppage at the Dauch Corporation plant, still commonly known by its former name, American Axle, halts the supply of axles and axle tubes destined for GM's mid-size and full-size pickups. If GM's existing stockpile of crucial parts runs out, the automaker won't be able to make some of its best-selling and most lucrative vehicles. The situation imperils GM's heavy-duty Chevrolet Silverado and GMC Sierra pickups, as well as mid-size trucks that compete for buyers with Toyota's Tacoma and Ford's Ranger. CBS News fires Pelley following criticism of bosses, by Isabella Simonetti. Veteran 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley was fired by CBS News a day after taking aim at editor-in-chief Barry Weiss's leadership during a staff meeting for the show. Executive producer Nick Bilton sent a note to Pelley on Tuesday night saying he was being terminated for cause, effective immediately, according to a copy of the letter reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. Pelley interrupted Bilton soon after he started reading introductory remarks at the Monday meeting, according to people in attendance. Pelley accused Weiss, who wasn't president, of murdering 60 Minutes and questioned Bilton's qualifications for the executive producer role. Bilton, who was named to the post last week, hadn't led a weekly TV news show before. Pelley spoke with Weiss, CBS News President Tom Sobrowski, Bilton, and Human Resources Representative Tuesday evening to discuss a path forward after his remarks, a meeting that turned tense. Your antipathy to the future of the show has come through loud and clear, Bilton wrote to Pelley, saying the correspondent had hijacked my first meeting with staff to disparage me, my qualifications, and my intentions with remarkable incivility and contempt. He called Pelley's behavior a performative display of hostility. Longtime 60 Minutes correspondent Anderson Cooper said in February that he planned to leave after the latest season, which wrapped in May. CBS also parted ways with correspondents Sharon Alfonsi and Cecilia Vega and executive producer Tanya Simon last week, when the show named Bilton as its new leader. From World Watch, European Union deal widens scope of deportations. The European Union has moved forward with a vast overhaul of its migration policy, aiming to increase deportations and sign controversial deals to build detention centers abroad. Rights groups have criticized it, comparing the new regulations to the Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies. The green lighting return hubs outside the 27-nation EU, the regulation represents the EU's hardest line on migration and has drawn sharp criticism from opponents who warn it will endanger migrants and undermine human rights from Spain to Romania. The deal was struck among the EU's three main institutions, the European Commission, the European Council, and European Parliament, on Monday evening. U.S.-Iran trade fire in Gulf, testing truce. After strikes on ship and bases, Central Command says ceasefire still holds. By Shelby Holliday and Michael R. Gordon. The U.S. and Iran exchanged heavy fire after the U.S. struck an empty oil tanker that it said was attempting to breach its blockade. That set off a string of attacks by both sides, culminating with Iran firing ballistic missiles at American bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. The strikes were among the most intense episodes of fighting in months and came as diplomatic efforts have stalled. Despite the heavy fire, U.S. Central Command said Tuesday night that the tenuous ceasefire was still ongoing. The two sides have repeatedly skirmished since the ceasefire went into place in April, while refraining from a broad resumption of the war. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, now Jill tells us she wanted Joe to run again no matter his growing infirmities. Jill Biden is out promoting her new memoir, and as for regrets, she doesn't have a few, only one. In retrospect, she wishes her husband hadn't run for a second term. As I look back, the former First Lady told NBC, would I want to put Joe through the hurt and the pain that we felt during that time? Never, never. I mean, it was so hurtful. Democrats are furious at this ex post admission, and we can see why. Mrs. Biden has finally seen the light 2 years later, yet she won't admit in the interviews or book excerpts we've seen that she played a crucial role in urging her husband to run again. By every account and our own reporting, she liked the White House and celebrity life and wanted Mr. Biden to serve until January 2029. Even now, Mrs. Biden denies that she saw signs of cognitive decline in Mr. Biden as president. When pressed on CBS, she said he was definitely aging and slowing down, but was the essence of the same Joe Biden. Apparently, she didn't see, or didn't want to see, what Americans told pollsters they could see with their own eyes, or what special counsel Robert Hur in 2024 told the country he saw in his interview with the president over Mr. Biden's handling of classified documents. A sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Thus, Mrs. Biden says it was a shock when Joe performed so poorly in that fateful late June debate with Donald Trump. As I watched it, I thought, oh my God, he's having a stroke, she told CBS, and it scared me to death. Yet, that isn't what she told the public after the debate. She said then that her husband had done such a great job and answered every question. The first couple also tried to keep the second-term dream alive, despite the growing calls from Democrats after the debate that he had to drop out. 3 days after the debate, Mrs. Biden told the magazine Vogue, in connection with a glamorous cover shoot featuring her, that the Bidens will not let those 90 minutes define the 4 years he's been president. As for what she said after the debate, she now says, I'm his wife. I'm not going to get out on the stage there and say, Joe, you really screwed that up. I mean, and we have all of our supporters there. The truth is that the Bidens clung to the presidency like life itself until it became impossible to do so. They only pulled the plug when Nancy Pelosi and others threatened to go public and stage a coup if they didn't drop out first. We use the word they here deliberately because of Mrs. Biden's role. This was a monumental act of selfishness, and the Democratic Party paid the price. Without a competitive primary, the party reacted to Mr. Biden's late withdrawal by rushing to anoint Vice President Kamala Harris as the default nominee. The party's 2024 candidate switcheroo was a political debacle of historic proportions. Mr. Biden asked voters to keep him in office until age 86, and Democrats fell into line in a protective phalanx until close to the end. The only dissenter was Dean Phillips, the former Minnesota congressman who predicted that Mr. Biden would lose if he ran, and the only serious candidate to challenge Mr. Biden in the primary. He was a prophet without a party. Mrs. Biden seems to bear a grudge against Miss Harris because she sought Joe's immediate endorsement. As we advised at the time, Democrats could have benefited from a competitive party convention to choose a nominee. The country would have been riveted to the event as a rare, actual political drama. But the original sin was Joe Biden's decision to run for a second term, abetted and encouraged by Jill. They won't admit it, but they both deserve outsized credit for helping Donald Trump win a second term. From the opinion pages. Don't blame Jill for Joe 2024. The question matters because we need to know if President Trump is a fluke. By Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. A lot more people are responsible for Joe Biden's decision to run for a second term than Jill Biden, whose delight in being First Lady and desire to remain so are evident in her new book. The two parties have a singular magnum focus to their existence, the 4-year presidential cycle. They don't spitball, they engage in ruthless strategizing worthy of the Pentagon War Room. And in 2024, Joe Biden had only one path. He needed Donald Trump to be his opponent, and he needed a version of Mr. Trump that would let Mr. Biden sidestep the biggest risk to his campaign, a television debate. The advisors widely reported to be behind the Biden strategy were Mike Donilon, Steve Ricchetti, and Anita Dunn. On March 24, 2022, with a war raging in Europe, at a NATO summit, Mr. Biden signaled publicly to every Democratic official in the U.S. that he would be very fortunate to have Mr. Trump for a 2024 opponent. Never mind that the election was still 967 days away, or that a president usually considers it unseemly to meddle in the other party's nomination. 9 days later, a staged front-page New York Times leak had Mr. Biden criticizing his Attorney General, Merrick Garland, for not criminally charging Mr. Trump. We can suspect the leak was staged for two reasons. Lacking was any Times effort to require the White House to confirm that Mr. Biden had used the words attributed to him. Also lacking was any effort to determine if the leak was authorized. Instead, the paper enabled a White House deniability charade with a quote insisting Mr. Biden didn't involve himself in the investigative priorities or decisions of the Justice Department. On May 23, 2022, and again on November 18, 2022, an attorney working with Georgia County Prosecutor Fani Willis met with White House officials. Ms. Willis had employed her boyfriend to help an election case against Mr. Trump at a pricey $250 an hour, which they soon were spending on vacations in Napa and the Caribbean. Miss Willis's lack of concern was telling. She seemingly viewed her prosecution of Mr. Trump was a service to the White House. She was entitled to a gratuity. 10 days before the Times leak, the New York Daily News savaged new District Attorney Alvin Bragg for dropping a Stormy Daniels-related investigation. Now Mr. Bragg revived the probe. When charges came down, I had my pick of analysis on the cable business channels where outright partisan lying is frowned upon, all drawing the identical conclusion. The indictment would improve Mr. Trump's chance of winning the nomination while weakening his chance of winning the general election. Exactly the formula Mr. Biden needed. But then things went wrong. The criminal cases against Mr. Trump bogged down. Mr. Biden's Justice Department investigated Mr. Biden himself for mishandling intelligence documents. A special counsel publicly reported that Mr. Biden had acted improperly, but was too old and forgetful to prosecute. The ultimate pitfall opened beneath the campaign when polls started showing Mr. Biden losing to Mr. Trump. Now he couldn't duck the fatal television debate by citing his presidential dignity and Mr. Trump's felon status. You know the rest of the story. Every book writer, every political journalist fails when they fail to say the truth about the 2024 Biden campaign. A selfish, cynical roll of the dice that was always more likely to end in a Trump election than a Biden second term. The truth was breathed only once in the mainstream press during the campaign that I saw, when the Times noted the Biden White House's exultation after Mr. Trump stormed to victory in the GOP Iowa caucus. To Mr. Biden's aides, the paper said, Mr. Trump's success was Mr. Biden's pathway to a second term. I bring this up not for backward-looking reasons. It goes to every question by our NATO and Asian allies and others around the world about the future of U.S. leadership after Mr. Trump. Is he really representative of the U.S. electoral majority, or merely representative of the uncanny incompetence of enemies, from James Comey in 2016 to Joe Biden in 2024? An all-suffusing misplaced sense of propriety shouldn't stop us from seeing the truth. Mr. Trump's presidency, even its useful accomplishments, owes all to the unnatural, self-sabotaging moronitude of his opponents. In 2024, his narrow victory, 115,000 votes in 3 states, would have changed the outcome, followed when the rival party in effect defaulted to a cardboard cutout with no features that it called not Trump. Such an election isn't a mandate for a revolution. Mr. Trump might yet have won the country's backing for what he was doing. He had every opportunity, but so far his approval ratings show something more closely resembling the opposite. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Energy markets limit the Hormuz shock. The world supply of fuel is much more diversified than it was during the energy crisis of the 1970s. By Daniel Yergin. Before the Gulf crisis, about 70 oil and natural gas tankers traversed the Strait of Hormuz every day. During May, 4 did. This cessation of normal traffic through the strait has brought to life the nightmare scenario for world energy: Iran seizing control of the maritime choke point. On a net basis, about 15 million barrels a day have disappeared from supply, for a total loss of about 1.2 billion barrels over 3 months. As the conflict heads into its 4th month, the oil market is at a juncture. So far, prices have been modulated in financial markets by expectations of an imminent settlement and buffered in the physical market by the drawing down of inventories. But inventories are shrinking. If the strait opens soon, prices will come down, though not to the low $60 a barrel seen at the beginning of the year when an oversupply loomed. If the strait remains mostly closed, the draining of inventories will likely send prices back up over the next few months, straining the world economy. Reopening the strait is a central point of the current negotiations, but even a swift reopening doesn't mean a swift return to normal. According to S&P Global's analysis, it would take up to 6 months to return to 80% of pre-crisis supply. First, the more than 170 tankers now floating in the Persian Gulf have to leave it. Then tankers would have to enter the Gulf to pick up oil stored in the Arab countries that line the Gulf. Then facilities in those countries damaged by missiles and drones would have to come back into operation. Repairing various facilities could take weeks, months, or even years. And ship owners and tanker captains would also have to become confident that they can sail without the threat of drones or fast boat attacks. The turmoil has made clear how much has been learned about energy security over the past half-century, mitigating what could have been a catastrophic energy shock. Winston Churchill had laid down the axiom of energy security on the eve of World War I when, as First Lord of the Admiralty, he converted the Royal Navy to oil from coal to gain speed and flexibility against the German fleet. Safety and certainty in oil, he said, lie in variety and variety alone. In other words, diversification of supply. Today, there is much more variety in world oil and natural gas than during the 1970s. The shale revolution has transformed the U.S. from the world's largest importer of oil to the world's largest producer of oil and natural gas and the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. Overall, the Western Hemisphere now produces more oil than the Middle East did before the crisis. Canada is the world's 4th largest oil producer. Brazil produces 4 times as much oil as Venezuela, and in Guyana, where production began only 7 years ago, output almost equals Venezuela's. In Argentina's Vaca Muerta region, shale oil production has grown sixfold since 2020. The current disruption will propel more oil and gas investment in the Western Hemisphere and Africa. Diversification goes beyond oil and gas. Responding to the tanker war during the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, Saudi Arabia built variety in the form of a pipeline system that now moves 7 million barrels of oil a day west to the Red Sea. Abu Dhabi built a pipeline looping around the Strait of Hormuz and plans to double capacity by 2027. France, which once depended on oil for electric generation, now relies mainly on nuclear. Japan led the development of the LNG industry to push oil out of its electric generation. The growing scale of wind and solar adds further diversification for electric generation. The crises of the 1970s gave rise to an international system for managing energy security. The International Energy Agency was established to coordinate national responses to crises and avoid a repetition of the bruising scramble among countries for oil that sent prices soaring. Strategic petroleum reserves were established to replace barrels lost to disruption. The IEA recently coordinated the release of oil from the strategic stocks of its member countries, including the U.S. Previous crises showed that markets themselves also contribute to energy security. They adjust faster than governments intervening to manage markets, which can make matters worse. The U.S. gasoline lines of the 1970s weren't the result of the crises themselves. Rather, they were manufactured by government policies, price controls, and clumsy bureaucratic allocation systems that dispatched gasoline to well-supplied regions and yanked it from regions in short supply. Today's crisis has hit Asia hardest due to its heavy dependence on oil and gas from the Gulf and leading to shortfalls in supply. In response, governments have resorted to interventions to repress demand, such as rationing, issuing COVID-era-like directives to work from home, and giving some domestic consumers priority over others. The U.S. is in a much better position than most other countries. As an energy exporter, America is benefiting from the revenue. The U.S. energy system is functioning efficiently, helping forestall a global economic crisis that could hit hard at home. If faced with major physical shortages of fuel, governments may have little choice but to intervene more directly in markets. Any intervention should be done with great care. Allowing markets to balance supply and demand, rather than trying to circumvent them, is a basic lesson of energy security. Let's hope that lesson won't have to be relearned if the strait isn't reopened soon. Mr. Juergen is Vice Chairman of S&P Global and author of The Prize and The New Map. Letters to the editor. Topic: SAT alone can't fix student preparedness. You make a strong case for using the SAT and ACT in college admissions based on the UC system's experience since 2020. Another strong argument for using standardized tests is that high schools throughout the country have neither uniform grading standards nor uniform curricula. A student whose class rank is around the middle or even lower in a very selective high school, whether public, private, or parochial, but who achieved high standardized test scores is very likely to be qualified to attend a highly selective college. The fact that prior SATs and ACTs are published as well as sample tests with detailed solutions from private test prep companies means that any student, no matter his income, can prepare. These books can be bought online inexpensively or borrowed from libraries without cost. From Eric H. Silverman, Highland Park, New Jersey. New topic: Iran's regime is the problem. Regarding your editorial, where the Iran talks stand now, it should be apparent that if the war's primary objective is to prevent Iran from ever having a nuclear bomb, as President Trump often states, that's the highest probability of success is to replace the Iranian regime with a pro-Western government supported by the Iranian people. No matter what piece of paper the U.S., the United Nations, or anyone else gets Tehran to sign, Iran will eventually arrive at nuclear capabilities as long as the current regime stays in power. To believe otherwise is to trust in hope over experience. It's clearer than ever that to end the nuclear threat, the Iranian people must take matters into their own hands. From Saul Stein, Castle Rock, Colorado. The Pepper and Salt cartoon today shows two dogs talking to each other, and one says, "They gave me Xanax for the co-op interview." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 3rd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and hopefully have a wonderful day or evening.